On the night of June 5, 1960, 4 teenagers were attacked in their tent by an intruder they never saw, and the sole survivor couldn't remember a single detail. Record shows us this. Lake Bodom sits roughly 30 kilometers northeast of Helsinki, Finland. On that June night, 2 boys and 2 girls, all in their late teens, had set up camp on the shore. They were ordinary kids on what should have been an ordinary weekend. By morning, 3 of them were dead, and the 4th lay hospitalized with no memory of what happened. The question we need to answer first is straightforward. What do we actually know about those final hours? The victims were identified as Ari Nordström, age 18, Seppo Boisman, 17, and Mela Ermeli Björklund, 15. The survivor, Nils Gustafsson, 19 years old. According to the file, they'd arrived at the lake that afternoon to enjoy the brief Nordic summer. They built a fire, cooked food, and settled into their tent as darkness fell. Nothing in the record suggests they were afraid or that anything felt wrong. Around 3 in the morning, the exact time isn't certain in the record, something broke that peace. A figure approached the tent. No witnesses saw who or what it was. What we know comes from what happened next. Someone or multiple someones attacked with what investigators believed was a knife. The assault was violent, it was fast, and it was, by all accounts, deliberate. Nils Gustafsson was found conscious but severely wounded. He had stab wounds across his body. The other 3, Nordström, Boisman, and Björklund, were dead or dying. The record shows rescue workers arrived after a hiker discovered the scene at dawn. By then, it was too late for 3 of them, and Nils, despite being conscious, could tell investigators almost nothing about his attacker. He had no memory of the assault itself. This raises the second question. How could a survivor of such violence remember nothing? The medical explanation was straightforward. Trauma. Severe shock and blood loss can trigger what's called dissociative amnesia. The mind, faced with unbearable violence, simply shuts down the recording. Nils's injuries were life-threatening. His body was fighting to survive. The record indicates doctors found this explanation plausible, though frustrating. From an investigative standpoint, it meant their only living witness was essentially useless. But here's what the file does tell us. Nils recovered. Physically anyway, and over time, fragments began to surface, not memories of the attack, but details that preceded it. He recalled a man approaching the tent earlier in the evening. A stranger. The man had asked for a cigarette. Nils remembered giving him one. The stranger had lingered. He'd seemed interested in the group. The question becomes, was this the attacker or a coincidence the investigation couldn't afford to overlook? Investigators pursued multiple leads. The record shows they questioned dozens of people. They examined the crime scene for physical evidence, fibers, footprints, anything that might identify the killer. The knife was never found. No clear suspect emerged. The case went cold, then colder. Years passed. Decades passed. The Lake Bodom murders became one of Finland's most notorious unsolved crimes, a wound that never quite healed. In 2005, decades later, new forensic techniques emerged. DNA analysis was attempted on evidence preserved from the scene, but the record only says that results were inconclusive. The trail had grown too cold, and then in 2015, 55 years after the murders, something unexpected happened. Nils Gustafsson, now in his 70s, was arrested and charged with the murders of his 3 companions. The accusation stunned Finland. The sole survivor, the victim himself, or so everyone believed, was now the prime suspect. According to the record, authorities claimed new evidence had emerged. They didn't publicly detail what that evidence was, but the implication was clear. Nils had killed his friends and staged the scene to look like an outside attack. He'd stabbed himself to create an alibi. The question now became urgent. Had the real killer been sitting in plain sight all along? Nils maintained his innocence. The record shows his defense argued that the arrest was based on circumstantial evidence and speculation. They pointed out that his amnesia had never been disputed, even by prosecutors. They argued that self-inflicted wounds of the severity Nils sustained would be extraordinarily difficult to inflict and survive. The trial became a battleground of competing narratives. Was Nils a killer who'd fooled everyone for half a century? Or a victim being prosecuted because the real killer was never found? In 2016, the court reached a verdict. The record shows Nils Gustafsson was acquitted. The judge determined that the evidence, while suggestive, was not sufficient to prove guilt beyond reasonable doubt. He was released. The case technically remained open, but the window for prosecution had effectively closed. Decades of investigation, a sensational arrest, and ultimately no resolution. 3 teenagers remained unavenged. So what happened that night in 1960? The honest answer is, we don't know. The record offers us fragments and theories, but no certainty. Some investigators still believe an outside attacker was responsible, a drifter or local criminal who was never identified. Others point to the circumstantial case against Nils, arguing that the acquittal was a technicality rather than exoneration. And some believe there may have been multiple attackers, a detail lost to time and trauma. What remains undisputed is this: 3 young people were killed. One survived but couldn't remember, and for 60 years their deaths have haunted Finland, a crime so perfectly preserved in mystery that no amount of time or forensic advancement has solved it. The Lake Bodom murders stand as a reminder that some questions, once lost in the darkness, may never find the light of an answer. Subscribe for more unsolved cases where the evidence contradicts itself and the truth remains buried.